Hey guys, thanks for joining me. My name is Mark. I'm with Couple of Fern chapter here in Seminole County, Central Florida. I'm here with Lindsay Cross. She is the Government Relations Director for Florida Conservation Voters, FCV. Please, if you have any comments or questions, Lindsay will be happy to address them during our live stream. But Lindsay, if you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we can go into the slideshow. It should be a very easy, interesting discussion.
Excellent. Well, hello, Couplet Fern Native Plant Society. It's good to be with you. Do you guys have a beautyberry chapter? That's one of my favorite Florida native plants. And the longleaf pine. I'm a sucker for a beautiful stand of longleaf pine. But definitely appreciate our Florida native plants and hope to, through this conversation, maybe learn a little bit more. I'll just mention that I attended your conference last year in Crystal River, which seems like so long ago, and had the opportunity maybe to meet some of you in person. I gave a presentation about conservation and how people can be more engaged in elections and policy work, because you are all so knowledgeable. And we know, especially during this pandemic, how important science is and making decisions based on data. So that's something that we'll touch on a little bit in this presentation. So I've got about 30 or 40 slides. I'll try and go through them fairly quickly. And we've got the slides up here. Please feel free to ask questions as I go. And if not, you can kind of wait and we'll take some questions at the end. But excited to be here with you all. So here's a brief overview about what I'm going to discuss, tell you a little bit about my background, what we do at Florida Conservation Voters, touch a little bit on conservation programs and especially the funding that makes those possible. I'll talk about some projects that you can be involved with, a little bit of understanding of how growth management plays into the protection of habitat and native plants. I'm going to focus about half of the presentation on a toll roads project, a large one happening throughout the state, and follow up with some ways that you all can be engaged, whether it's on a particular issue or just on conservation initiatives broadly. All right. So my background starts with a foundation in environmental health and environmental science. I've gotten a bachelor's of science in environmental health from Colorado State University and a master's in environmental science and policy from University of South Florida in Tampa. So I started out as a scientist and doing a lot of work with management of the Tampa Bay ecosystem. I spent 14 years, an excellent career at the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, helping to protect and restore Florida's largest open water estuary. Many of the roles included overseeing research and restoration projects within the Bay. One thing that was an unending task was trying to tackle non-native invasive vegetation, such as Brazilian pepper. So in this photo, you can see that I'm single-handedly removing all of Brazilian pepper around Tampa Bay. I'm just kidding. This was part of a large ecosystem restoration project in some mangroves and a portion of Tampa Bay. But I appreciated the opportunity to convene work groups and kind of consortium of scientists, managers, and the public on Bay restoration issues. And certainly that includes restoration of our native habitats, whether they are coastal or upland areas. I also developed a lot of documents for the public and also our elected officials during that role. For about 2.5 years, I had the pleasure of serving as the executive director of the Florida Wildlife Corridor, which is a nonprofit. And one of the hallmarks of this organization is the use of film and photography, so visual media, to inspire Floridians and people around the globe to be advocates for wild Florida. The organization is most known for taking 2 1,000-mile expeditions throughout the state and demonstrating that there are still connected habitats throughout our state, which is our combination of publicly owned lands as well as privately owned areas such as ranches and timber plantations. When I was there, we worked on a shorter expedition and a film that came out of that just a few years ago called The Last Green Thread. And that is close to where you all are in Seminole County. It crossed from the Disney Wilderness Preserve over towards Lake Louisa and eventually the Green Swamp, which is the headwaters of the Hillsborough River. So that is probably the closest that the expedition in recent years has come to Seminole County and to where many of you may live. Through that job, I really started to understand even more the importance of storytelling and using science in a meaningful way. I now serve as the Government Relations Director for Florida Conservation Voters, which is a nonprofit based out of Tallahassee. I live in St. Petersburg, but I spend the legislative session and up in Tallahassee and go back and forth for committee weeks and meeting with legislators. Of course, all of that work has been shifted to online platforms right now, but we are doing our best to adapt and appreciate opportunities like this to virtually meet, and hopefully in the future we'll be able to meet in person. But a lot of the work I do is advocating for funding for conservation. That image shows me speaking in front of a Natural Resources Appropriation Committee, work closely with elected officials and trying to develop good policies and legislation and to stop bad legislation. The work that we do as the Florida Conservation Voters is focused both on education of the public, but also our elected officials. So we have a goal of electing lawmakers who are real conservation leaders and who are going to protect our environment and make sure that there's healthy communities for everyone. So we're very focused on racial justice and equity and making sure that we have programs in place that are looking at all sectors of our population, and especially when we're looking at issues related to climate change, how we can move towards a just transition to renewable energy that includes everyone and doesn't disproportionately negatively impact some sectors of the population. So the slide here is what we call the cycle of accountability. So it means that if we are supporting a candidate in an election, which is a component of what we do, once they get into the legislature, and generally we're working in statewide offices, so state senators, state representatives, we are then making sure that once they get into office, they are continuing to support strong conservation legislation. We're trying to bring other people from both sides of the aisle into that battle with us and proposing things and trying to pass measures that are going to advance how we're conserving land and water, what we're doing about climate, and upholding access to democracy for all people. At the end of each of the legislative sessions, we come out with a legislative report. It's about a 6-page document which summarizes 4 of our key issue areas, being natural lands and public lands and natural areas, climate and clean energy, clean water, and democracy. So this book is available on our website under our publications or our news tab. And I would encourage you to check it out. It's accessible. It has kind of a high-level summary of what was good and what was bad in the legislative session. I'm just going to talk about public lands and natural areas, but the bottom line is that as in the past several years, there was some excellent legislation that was proposed, but not much good that actually got passed. And there was some bad legislation that was passed, and some of it that has not been signed by the governor yet, but that could have some serious implications for our state. In terms of conservation programs, I just wanted to mention that to have effective conservation that's protecting native plants and wildlife and water supply and air quality, we need to have projects at all levels of government. The Land and Water Conservation Fund is something that we utilize on a federal level. It's been around for decades, but it has not had consistent and permanent funding for many years. It was permanently reauthorized last year, which was a big win, and it had a year of funding, but we are still seeking to have permanent funding for that. That should put about $900 million annually into conservation throughout the U.S. Florida has been the recipient of tens of millions of dollars, and I don't know all the projects in Seminole County, but it's an impressive list. We see that Florida has benefited from some of these federal programs. On the state level, the Florida State Parks is a program that I think everyone is familiar with, which provides recreation as well as protection of our habitats. We now have 175 parks in the state of Florida, with the last one, the Ruth B. Gilchrist Park, being developed just a couple years ago. But those are really important for ecotourism, for our economy, and for getting people to appreciate our natural area. A lesser known program, which is really useful in more urban areas, is something called the Florida Communities Trust. This is a matching grant program that provides match to governments and to nonprofits. So Seminole County, for instance, or a nonprofit land trust could apply for this and need to come up with at least a 50% match. So it's a great program for our state. And some of the smaller urban parks that you may be familiar with are a result of the Florida Communities Trust. I just want to put a little plug for that. I will talk about a few of the other programs during this presentation as well. And then, of course, Seminole County has a natural lands program as well. Time and time again, taxpayers will voluntarily tax themselves. They will pay more to make sure that their natural environment is protected. And so referendums on a county level can be a very effective way to protect land, especially if money is not flowing from the federal or the state governments the way it historically was, or that's consistent with the needs of the local communities. Briefly, in the state of Florida, we used to enjoy very robust conservation funding. And I apologize I'm always frustrated when people say, you can't see what's on this graph, but, and here I am doing it. What this bar graph is meant to show is that for about 20 plus years, our state had $300 million or more in conservation funding that was dedicated to programs like Preservation 2000 and the more recent iteration called Florida Forever. That was done through bonding, but we had $300 million each year to work with, and that was responsible for protecting some of our most unique natural areas and places for all of us to enjoy. Of course, we had a recession in 2008, which put a hold on our conservation buying, despite the fact that land prices were better, and that would really be the time to invest. The legislature cut off all funding, and for several years, you'd only have little scraps or no funding at all. Once our economy started to kind of come back in more recent years, unfortunately, the funding that we historically had enjoyed did not follow suit. This funding in legislation is supposed to go to a suite of different programs. When you hear the word Florida Forever, it can refer to a program, but it also can refer to kind of conservation programs in general. So there's actually a Florida Forever Trust Fund, and money is statutorily supposed to go to this trust fund and then funneled out to a variety of programs according to this pie chart. I'll tell you that this pie chart has not been followed for many years, but this is what's supposed to happen. So if you hypothetically had $100 million, $35 million or 35% would go to what many of us know of as the Florida Forever Priority List. It's also called the Art Council, in reference to the Acquisition and Restoration Council, which is a group of about 10 individuals to the governor and cabinet about lands to either purchase or to protect through conservation easements. So that's the bulk of the money. 30% of that money is supposed to go to the water management districts for restoration and management. Again, in recent years, the water management districts have been doing very little new restoration, new acquisition work, probably been more focused just on managing their existing lands. A 23.5% is both the Florida Communities Trust. That's the bulk of it, about 21.5%. And then another 2% for a program called the Stan Mayfield Working Waterfronts Program. That's to ensure that we can still have, working waterfronts. So whether that's oystering or seafood production. So that's specifically for keeping the economy in some of those working waterfronts going. As a section over here and kind of this orange color, this is the Rural and Family Lands Protection Program. This is something through the Department of Agriculture that is specifically to put conservation easements on working landscape. So that it includes cattle ranches and timber, a little less so with other types of ag, but this is an opportunity to maintain productive agriculture and keep it from being developed in other ways in the future. And then there are some additional money that goes to Department of Environmental Protection for things called inholdings and acquisitions, things for the Division of Rec and Park for some of their improvements. So again, this is the way funding is supposed to occur. It typically does not happen that way in recent years. Before demonstrated that we had little to no conservation funding for more than 10 years. In response to that, citizens and environmental organizations put an amendment on the ballot in 2014. It was Amendment 1, and it was called the Water and Land Legacy Amendment, and it would statutorily take a third of documentary stamp revenue. So the purchase, when lands or property is sold, 33% of that goes to this Florida Forever Trust Fund, and it's almost a way to kind of balance the scales a little bit. Some of that money is supposed to go to affordable housing, as well as money to protect water and land to make up for some of the losses when we're developing natural areas. So there was overwhelming support for this. It passed by 75%, and you can see that Seminole County, it looks like it was in the high 70s, probably the 75 to 80%. So a popular program. And we thought that with the passage of that, we would get back to at least $300 million. But again, that is not what has happened. In response to that, Florida Conservation Voters, we developed a publication this year, and I'll show it to you here, but it's called our GEMS report. And we wanted to have a tool, something that our legislators and the public could hold that would talk a little bit about this history, about the importance of conservation in a way that is visually appealing. So here's a picture of some of our Florida springs. What it does is it goes to this history, and then we highlight 12 conservation success stories, places throughout the state, whether they're parks, preserves, agriculture areas, different land ownerships and ways that they were protected. And then just as important, we highlight 12 remaining gems. So these are projects that have been on kind of the wait list, that are waiting for funding and that can be protected, that need to be protected, but we need that consistent and adequate funding to do so. So leaders. So I'm going to show just an example from your area, one project that we highlighted as part of our conservation gems. So this is a place that still needs to be fully protected. An area called the Wekiva-Ocala Greenway. I'm sure you all know the beautiful Wekiva River. Portions of it are designated as a wild and scenic river. We only have 2 sections of river in the entire state of Florida that are part of that program. So it's something to be proud of. We do have a lot of it that already is protected. Close to 58,000 acres is protected, but there's a little over 23,000 acres that remains kind of in the balance, so it needs to be protected. It also includes 4 counties, including Seminole, and several different House districts and state Senate districts. So this is just a kind of a screenshot of what this page looks like, and each of the projects will show a map of the areas that are protected, the places that remain to be protected, and maybe some interesting facts about that area. There are some really incredible natural habitats there, including some wet floodplain swamps, high hammocks, sand grub habitat. So it's a place that we want to continue to see more of that acreage go from the unprotected to the protected. So that was a win. We were able to secure $100 million for the suite of Florida Forever programs this year. So compared to the last year when we only got $33 million, we were pleased with that. We want to use that as a way to try and get more funding and more consistent funding in the years going ahead. We had a bill that was introduced for the second time in the year by Senator Lindsay Stewart, who is the kind of the senator, your next door senator. If you're in Seminole County, it's mostly Senator Simmons. Senator Stewart, has been a huge friend of conservation. She introduced a bill to permanently fund Florida Forever programs at $100 million. That bill passed through a few committee stops, but it did not reach the Senate floor. And the companion bill in the House did not get heard in any committee stops, which was unfortunate. However, the draft budget does have $100 million in there. Part of it goes to the Florida Forever priority list. Part goes to rural and family lands. Part goes to Florida Communities Trust, Stan Mayfield, and then a program that creates more like recreational and ball fields. So that's how we get to $100 million. With the pandemic and the downturn in the economy that we're starting to see already, we don't know what is going to pan out for that. Several organizations in the conservation community have sent a letter to the governor specifically requesting that he not veto any of those conservation programs. We think it's critical. We know how much we're using our natural areas and hoping that people are doing so safely. Even though many of our state parks are still closed, we know that people are enjoying their neighborhood parks and needing that time to kind of reset and get out and spend some time in the fresh air and outside. So conservation is an important economic driver of our state. One bad piece of legislation that I wanted to mention, specifically related to growth management, this is Senate Bill 410. This passed both the House and the Senate. It has not been sent to the governor yet, but again, many of our organizations have opposed it during the legislative session, and we've also sent a veto request to the governor. Many bills have not been transmitted to his desk yet because of the current global health and economic crisis that we're dealing with. But we also need to stay vigilant on some of these matters because when we're all thinking about the health of our families and our communities, sometimes things can kind of slip under the radar and negative things can get passed. So while we are sensitive to what's happening with the COVID-19 pandemic, we are continuing to work on conservation issues, and Senate Bill 410 is one that we think has some very serious negative implications. In particular, it would undermine the authority of many of our county governments that have rural areas and prevent them from being able to keep them rural. I know that there is an issue in Seminole County right now with the Econ River Wilderness area and the river cross. That's something that we are monitoring, and I know probably all of you are much more familiar with that than we are. But it's important that if you have amendments or zoning within your county charter or your county amendment, that continues to be recognized, and that the local community needs to have input into those things. We're worried that it could cause more high density development in rural areas, and 1,000 Friends of Florida that works a lot on growth management specifically noted that some rural areas approved by Seminole County in 2014 could be in play here and could be in jeopardy. It would also put some undue burdens on local governments to include a property rights element in the comprehensive plan. That's duplicative, so it's really just putting more task and kind of some unfunded mandates to our local governments, and it could override some of the county limits on development. So we continue to monitor that and hope that the governor does the right thing and vetoes that bill. All right, I'm going to spend probably the next 10 minutes talking specifically about MCORs. These are a series of toll roads. This was a bill that passed last year through the legislature. It happened very quickly. It was kind of the baby of the Senate President Bill Galvano from the Sarasota area. It's something that we are very engaged with, and there's a kind of a grassroots movement with more than 85 organizations and businesses around the state that we call ourselves the No Roads to Ruin Coalition, who have been opposing this since the beginning. This is a shot from the Department of Transportation's website. MCOR stands for the Multi-Use Corridors of Economic and Regional Significance, or Opportunity Regional Economic Significance, correct. So to break it down, there are 3 study areas that traverse through about a third of the state of Florida, going from the south. We'll work our way north. The first study area is called the Southwest Central Corridor. This would go from Collier County up into Polk County. The Northern Turnpike would connect wherever the terminus of that would be in Sumter County. This is a 4-county area, go up into Dixie County. And then the Suncoast Connector would go from Citrus County and go all the way up into the Georgia border. All told, this could be 330 new miles of asphalt and paved roads, tolled limited access highways that could be developed through our state. And I'm going to spend some time talking about some of the significant impacts to many sectors of our society. We know that roads bring development. This is something from Broward County, but we know that in the Seminole and the Central Florida area, you guys are no strangers to roads with I-4, with the Wekiva Parkway, with I don't even know all of the names of the toll roads and the other highways, but roads bring development. There's no two ways about it. Sorry for the cliche. We're concerned about sprawling development that will occur as a result of these, because they are projected to go through some of our most rural and undeveloped areas. Projections from a study called the Florida 2070 report that was jointly developed with the University of Florida and 1,000 Friends looked at what the state of Florida would look like in 2070, going from a population of about 21 million people to about 35 million. So you can see increases in with our statewide. I think I'm missing a slide here where we still are going to have a lot of red regardless of where we are. But the figure on the left, of course, shows more widespread urban development. The alternative is to first protect our most valuable natural and agricultural areas, specifically protecting areas within the Florida Wildlife Corridor. If we did that first, if we protected these natural areas first, we could protect at least 5 million acres of natural and agricultural areas. Without taking that strategic and proactive strategy, those areas could be lost to development permanently. As I mentioned, there's over 85 organizations that are a member of the coalition. The Florida Native Plant Society is one of those members, and Eugene Kelly has been very involved with the task force meetings. I'll talk about that a little bit more, but we talk regularly. He's been a great resource. He's actually spoken at some of the task force meetings. Of course, there's a lot of discussion about panther and wildlife, and Gene is always there to talk about the incredible natural plant communities. There were other folks today. They were talking about the Lake Wales Ridge, and we know that that is one of the highest biodiversity and endemic spots in Florida and really around our nation. So having the Native Plant Society as a member of the No Roots to Ruin Coalition is just so incredible. We're grateful that you are part of it, and hopefully we'll stay active in this. We know that roads are bad for our human health in many ways. Roads bring air pollution, and they also have an impact on our wetlands, springs, and our aquifer recharge areas. When you take areas from natural and put impervious surfaces on it, it increases the runoff, it increases the temperature of the water. That can lead to degradation of water quality and our air quality. In terms of our wildlife, including our iconic Florida panther, these roads are slated through some of our best remaining natural and agricultural areas, and really would be kind of a death wish for the Florida panther. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service biologists have stated that it would pretty much make it impossible for the Florida panther population to expand and to continue to exist in a sustainable way. Roads bisect habitats, and they were also the number one cause of mortality for the Florida panther is collisions with vehicles. Also, because these roads are slated to be funded with state taxpayer dollars and with toll road revenue, it may be exempt from some of our federal environmental standards, such as the National Environmental Policy Act. The acronym is NEPA. Some of those regulations have been rolled back in recent months by the Trump administration, but those are important safeguards to make sure that large projects take look at different alternatives. And as part of the No Roads to Ruin Coalition, one of our rallying cries is simply no build, that is the only alternative. For our springs and our water supply, especially in the Suncoast Connector area, that's going through some of our first magnitude springs area and our spring sheds. We're already seeing considerable degradation of our springs from nutrient pollution, both from agriculture and from urban development. This will exacerbate that and could make it very difficult to restore some of these springs. Many of these have been developed are kind of low nutrient environments, so just a small increase in nitrogen or fertilizers, phosphorus, can shift the equilibrium from our natural submerged aquatic vegetation to an algae-dominated system, and then we lose the wildlife that it supports in response. This project is also economically, it's a boondoggle. We have significant existing infrastructure needs within the state. Florida recently was ranked 40th nationwide in cost effectiveness and condition of our roads. We have many areas that will have to be retrofitted or moved to deal with things like sea level rise. We know from other roads, especially the Suncoast Parkway, not to be confused with the Suncoast Connector, but the Suncoast Parkway in Citrus County was built with grossly overestimated toll revenues. For people who don't live within these study areas, it doesn't mean that you won't be paying for them. Central Florida and Southeast Florida, revenues from your toll roads will be subsidized to pay for these roads. And now that we may be shifting potentially permanently to more working at home and less travel, these toll projections are even lower. There's already been $135 million allocated for this project. The Transportation Fund is expected to get more than $100 million annually, but this is just for some of the initial phases. Projections from the Wekiva Parkway, which took into account a lot of the needs of the natural environment, had elevated roadways. That was an expensive road. It cost about $64 million a mile. So if you extrapolate that out to 330 miles, you're looking at a price tag of about $20 billion. So it's a big price tag for roads that were not part of DOT's 5-year work plan, or not roads that the local communities have been asking for. Again, our existing population centers, not to say that we don't want economic opportunity in our rural areas, but there are many needs that we have in Central Florida, South Florida, throughout the state, including new public health needs that we have. This money could be better spent. We've also heard from folks in a lot of the rural communities that they don't want this roads because they've specifically moved or stayed in less densely populated areas because they appreciate that lifestyle. And a limited access highway that either changes the character of their downtown area or avoids it altogether could mean that many local businesses can't stay open, and that the growth that comes along with these roads may not be the growth that people in those communities want. Agriculture, we have seen how important it is that we have food security in our state. Agriculture is the #2 driver of our economy, and it's important that we have productive working landscapes. Groups like the Coalition of Immokalee Workers are part of the coalition because they're concerned about if these roads, if they reduce the amount of farmable areas, then many of their workers will be out of jobs and will be out of homes. I think finally, some of the benefits that have been touted by the legislature or DOT really are unfounded and are based on assumptions. One of the assumptions is that during a hurricane, everyone should be evacuating. That's contrary to what the state's own emergency website has recommended, and that sheltering in place is preferable. Of course, we know that will change in this hurricane season with the pandemic that we're experiencing. But trying to get, regardless of the number of road miles, trying to get 20 million people onto the roads and evacuating into Georgia is not the right strategy. There are ways that you all can be engaged in this, and I would encourage you to do so. The MCORS process, just as many things in the state, is having to be nimble, and we're adjusting the way we engage with people. In the past, there have been in-person task force meetings. So each of the task forces has met 4 times in person. One of them has met 5 times, but those are an opportunity for members of the public to come and give public comments. Each of the task forces are made up of about 40, a little over 40 individuals, and they're encouraged to stay for the public comment. And that's a time that folks like Gene Kelly are there, and other members of the Native Plant Society, talking about the importance of native plants. So there's also community open houses, which are more of like a science fair format. We don't recommend that as much because you don't get that dialogue with all the task force members, and there's a power of being able to stand up at a microphone, even if it feels a little nerve-wracking at first, but being able to share why this affects you personally, or why it affects your children, or how you want to see the state of Florida develop in the future. There are ways to provide written comments, but we think that these in-person meetings, when they get when there's a safe opportunity to do that, we think that's the best way for the public to get engaged. And you can see several of us in the coalition and other concerned Floridians with our no build and our sham signs up there. This week, DOT has shifted to virtual webinars, and this morning I participated in the first one. So the Southwest Central, again, that's the road from Collier, so Naples area, into Polk County. That met this morning. The format has been that there's about an hour of presentations. Really, this is just prepping the task force members for how to access some GIS databases and do homework on their own. So it does not have that iterative, back and forth dialogue that is beneficial from a public meeting perspective. We understand that DOT's working within these confines right now, but it's certainly not an ideal way to take public comment. At 10:30, they do open it up to public comment, which is you're given so from my experience this morning, you just have to be ready whenever they call your name. They will unmute your microphone and you need to be ready to speak for less than 3 minutes. If you are interested, I would encourage you to sign up for the webinars. If you want to give public comment, you have to do that by 5 o'clock the day before. So the Northern Turnpike area, which includes Sumter, Marion, Citrus, and Levy County, that webinar will be tomorrow morning. So you would need to sign up both for the webinar and to give public comment. You would need to do that by 5 p.m. And then Thursday, they'll be discussing the Suncoast Corridor. That's the one from Citrus County all the way up into Georgia. So I would encourage you, if you have the time, to be involved with the project that way. If you are not able to, you can send comments into DOT. And this was actually about a public records request. DOT does have a way to email them comments. If you've got the time, we would prefer for the verbal comments or for participation through an in-person task force meeting. Yes, and I see a comment from someone named Kimberly that there were a lot of people that came out strongly against the roads this morning. That's correct. There were excellent comments from people, including some folks that were members of the Florida Native Plant Society. We were starting to tally. I think we had there were about 120 people who signed up for comments, but really only about 30 that kind of heeded the call when they were and able to make their comments. Each of them was against the road for some reason, except for one gentleman from Georgia who thought that it was a great thing for hurricane evacuation and had a very specific route that he detailed for DOT. But the majority of the people have been opposed to it, and that's we need to continue to hear more voices and unique voices from businesses and folks around the state. So if you are part of other organizations or a business, we would encourage you to be part of the No Roads to Ruin Coalition. And I apologize that I didn't put that that Facebook page up there, but we do have a Facebook page, which you can find by searching for No Roads to Ruin Coalition. And we have a new website that we will be going live with, I think, sometime this week. So that's very exciting. In terms of this type of legislation and going forward, it is incumbent on all of us to vote for people who have conservation interests and then to hold those elected officials accountable. So this type of legislation, there were over 100 organizations that opposed this. We know that it was legislation that was at the request of developers and folks in the asphalt and the trucking industry, people who would benefit personally or in their businesses, not everyday Floridians like you and I that saw the need for this. So maybe we don't win all of the times, but we need to continue to be vigilant and tell our elected officials that we're paying attention, and that that there's more of us than there are of them. And if they want to get elected again, they need to be promoting things that are positive for our environments and communities, healthy communities for everyone. Just a few ways that you can be involved specifically with Florida conservation voters. We would love for you to hop on over to our website, which is fcvoters.org, and sign up for our email. We do a lot to keep it to just a couple emails a week. We have a kind of a Friday roundup every afternoon. So if there's things that you missed, we'll summarize those things. We provide opportunities for you to see what we've been doing, participate in things like Facebook Live events. We've been shifting towards a lot more of those webinars. So please sign up. We promise we won't abuse it, but would love for you to stay engaged that way. If you're interested, we would love for you to purchase one of our GEMS reports for, I believe they're $15, so it's a great deal. That's me presenting it to Senator Linda Stewart from Orlando. Our supporters were great this past year, and their donations helped us to put this in the hand of all 160 of our lawmakers, as well as the cabinet members, and have personal meetings with a lot of them. We know that next year, when we go back to ask for funding for conservation and to increase it and to make it permanent, we're starting with people who are more knowledgeable and have probably seen a park or preserve that they're familiar with and are more likely to support or sponsor good conservation legislation in the future. We also have ways for you to take action through, so these are some of the tabs on our website. So we'll have action alerts if we're asking people to call their lawmakers during the legislative session, or ask the governor to veto a specific bill. Again, we try to be strategic about those and to make sure that we provide opportunities for people across the state to be engaged in those initiatives. And then we have just a really excellent social media presence that's curated by my colleague Carson Mitchell, an Instagram, Facebook, as well as a Twitter account. So please follow us and share and like those things. We want to continue the dialogue that way. And this is my personal contact information, my FC Voters email, my cell phone. I also have my own Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter handles that are all under Lindsay Cross FL. So I share things related to Florida conservation voters and other community initiatives. So would love for you to follow that way as well. So that is the end of my slides. And I know I've been talking a lot. I would love to see if there's any questions that people have, or if Mark has some questions for me.
Lindsay, I have to first thank you. You knocked it out of the ballpark. I learned so much during the presentation.
Thank you.
And many of my peers know that I'm not politically savvy or inclined. I'm not a politician or somebody that likes to delve into politics, but it does give me a few pointers on how I can make small but meaningful steps to voice my opinion without particularly being in the political limelight. I had a question regarding petitions. You mentioned that being in person and showing up to meetings and being a physical presence, being visible, is better than just signing a petition. Do they matter in our current political landscape? Do they count those petitions? Do numbers matter at the end of the day, or are they really a thing of the past?
The short answer is that everything matters. The more personal you can make something, the more leverage you're going to have with that. I can tell you with the MCORs, there's Florida Conservation Voters has had action alerts where we have kind of a form email that goes to either Department of Transportation or to the task force members. They tabulate, they kind of recognize that in a different way. We know from making public records requests from DOT that they just kind of tally the number of emails they've had, but they don't give it as much weight as a email that comes directly to their inbox with a personal note to it. And then those are shared with task force members, but you can't guarantee that each of the task force members is taking the time to read them.
Right. Right.
In terms of legislators, when we put out what we call P2 actions, like action alerts, when we ask people to call a few people specifically, maybe budget chairs or people involved in a committee that are going to hear a bill, when people take the time to call a legislator's office, even if they only talk to their legislative aide, they are taking tallies, especially if it's your own elected official. So if you were calling Senator Simmons, that's more effective than if I was calling him. So they are making note. I've actually had a representative from Hillsborough County that co-sponsored one of the conservation funding bills this year because he got several calls in one day from his constituents. Our group and others had asked people to make calls and ask for co-sponsors. And so it prompted him to look at the bill and decided that he would co-sponsor. That's not someone that we would have normally reached out to, but now he's knowledgeable about it, and we can use that going forward. If there's folks that you have in your local community, if you have a relationship with your county commissioner or a city council member, or your state rep or your state senator, if you have the time to send them a personal email or go to Tallahassee or to their district office and spend, it is an investment of time, but once you have start to build that personal relationship, it's easier to come back and ask for things in a kind of a less personal format. So if they already know your name, your affiliation, what you're concerned about, and then you call and they say, "Oh, Mark, I remember you were concerned about this, this preserve in your area," then it's that much more effective. So the summary of that is petitions are part of it, but I don't think you're going to see change with that alone.
Yeah, solid. I had a question regarding the Roads to Ruin Coalition and the NCOR's proposal. You had mentioned that people in the asphalt industry, road building industry, they are all for it because there's money to be made, of course, and it does directly benefit their businesses. Are you receiving the same feedback from private landowners in these least developed areas, large ranches? What is their take? I mean, we always look towards our ranchers as part of Floridian Plant Society as being allies in conservation because they have large tracts of land that host some beautiful rare species of plants, and we consider them partners in the overall environmental effort. Mm-hmm. However, are you seeing from your experience some landowners eager to kind of unload their land at this point and walk away? What's the general take?
I think it's difficult to generalize that, Mark. There are some landowners, I think, that have different long-term goals with their properties. We have a lot of landowners, especially that are multi-generational landowners that have a very strong land ethic and connection to the area. One of the problems is that we have not had the funding available for them to permanently protect their areas. It's unrealistic to think that someone who has a lot of wealth in terms of property can just donate that land. Most of us get paid for the services that we do. So if we want to see land protected, especially areas that connect existing areas or help support wildlife corridors. We need to make those investments as a state and a nation. So that means having money in Florida Forever or the Rural and Family Lands Protection Program to either pay for that land outright or to put conservation easements on it. With the easements, they can continue to work the land, but it won't be developed as a subdivision, for example. In the absence of those programs, it can be difficult for landowners to say no to a developer. We see that happen when land is passed down through generations and there's estate taxes that have to be paid. Sometimes children and grandchildren have no other choice but to sell off a portion of the land to pay for those taxes. And then you start to fragment that landscape and it makes it easier to kind of sell off piece by piece. Correct. So I know that there are some landowners who want to continue to ranch or to have timber operations. There may be some that see this as an opportunity to cash out.
Right, and walk away. Yeah, that's that. It seems like a very situational, case-by-case basis. Folks, if you have any other questions, please comment there. We're wrapping things up here with Lindsay. Lindsay, thank you so much for your time. My biggest takeaway from this is to go on the FCV website and sign up for the Eco Action Alerts. I have personally benefited from learning and reading through them, and it's beautifully put together, easy to digest graphics, and it kind of is something that you can do with just 2 minutes of your time. So I really appreciate the intention behind them and the structure of those Eco Action Alerts or your newsletters, and you try to keep them at a minimum, as you said. So it definitely doesn't crowd my inbox. And that happens to be the vehicle of my, burgeoning relationship with FCB, Carson, Jonathan, and yourself and the rest of the team. So I want to thank you again for your time today. Lindsay, if there was 2 things, I always ask our presenters this, if there were 2 things that you would like people to take away from today's program, what would they be?
That we're stronger together and we always have opportunities to make change for the better.
Awesome, guys. All right, well, it's almost 3 o'clock. Thank you so much for joining.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure. I hope we can see you in person in October or sometime shortly thereafter.
Yes.
So
thank you so much.
Stay safe and healthy and well, everyone.
Yeah. All right. Bye, guys. Thanks so much for joining us. Until next time.
Thanks.